Deimos Arcana has brought us two new kitgun chambers, the Sporelacer and the VERMISPLICER. These chambers allow for two whole new sets of kitgun variations for both primary and secondary weapon slots. In my previous video, I covered the different build options for the primary versions of the Gaze, Tombfinger, Rattleguts and Catchmoon. I'll link you that video in the description down below in case you missed it. So today, I'll give you the constructions you'll want for these new modular weapons, both primary and secondary. I'm Nick Engineer, let's solve a practical problem. In the previous video, I went in depth into the various DPS and status proc options available to you, and picked out key peaks in the options. To be quite honest, you don't need so many options. I've done the math, made the graphs, but I'm reasonably certain the top question on everyone's mind is, what gives the most damage? So, that's our focus today. I've also taken into account the 4 new loaders and 2 new grips to ensure you get the optimal results from all of this. I'll be honest with you right now, most of these options are pretty lackluster, especially considering what goes into attaining them. But one build really works well. Let's dive in and find out which. First, the VERMISPLICER Primary. This gun is a beam class rifle weapon. Think like the Amprex or Nukor, but of course primary. This beam is an infested set of tendrils, which takes some time to reach full extension. Now when it comes to the modules, this weapon doesn't modify its fire rate. Instead, the range is what's adjusted, just like with the Gaze. As it turns out, the DPS difference between the best and second best grip for the VERMISPLICER is only 5%, with a roughly 20% drop between the highest and lowest grips. In exchange for that 20% damage drop, you get nearly double the range. Range is absolutely crucial to the usefulness of beam weapons, certainly when you're comparing 16 meters to 30 meters. Save yourself the hassle of adding in any kind of range extension mod, which is taking up precious space usually for damage, and make use of the brash splat VERMISPLICER. Maximum range, still solid damage for the weapon. Oh, and in comparison to other primary weapons in the meta, it's not terrible, but not amazing. It compares well to the Amprex, which is another beam weapon, but the VERMISPLICER has around 20% higher DPS than the Amprex, but half the status procs. That's assuming you're using the brash build. It also has significantly higher range than the Amprex, and it has an 8 toxin, which is pretty sweet. So statistically, it is better, and yet, in using the VERMISPLICER, it didn't feel better. The way it latches is just inferior. Also, the Amprex chains reliably from bodies, not just living targets, so that's a point to the Amprex. So VERMISPLICER Primary, good, but not great. Next is the Sporelacer Primary. This blob launcher actually classifies itself as a shotgun, somehow. Given it fires little toxic grenades, and that I already have a StarCraft themed Gaze called the Void Ray, I've decided to nickname my Sporelacer Baneling Bust. In fact, I've named all my infested kitguns after StarCraft references, with the VERMISPLICERs being Abathur's Grasp and Neural Parasite, and the Sporelacer Secondary being Zagara's Gift. Anyway, I digress. As with other kitgun builds, to gain damage you need crits, and gaining crits costs status. Right at the very top for this then, to no one's surprise if you watched the previous video, is Tremor Splat. This is the simplest of all 4 new kitgun options, so it's no shocker to me that it works best with the old optimal loadout. It has 23% higher DPS than the next best option for burst damage, and for sustained damage, including reloads, it's similarly high. So yeah, for a primary Sporelacer, Tremor Splat, simple stuff. As for the damage compared to other more meta weapons like the Fulmin, it's not so great. The Fulmin with the same amount of Former invested is simply better than the Sporelacer. So the Sporelacer Primary can affect multiple targets in small explosive zones, but it just doesn't keep up. This brings us next to the VERMISPLICER Secondary. Like its primary counterpart, this is a beam weapon, but this time with insane multi-shot statistics. This means the top build will have a seemingly terrible status chance of just over 3%, but multiplied by fire rate and multi-shot, it's rather manageable. The multi-shot it starts with multiplies with mods, so it's effortless to get double-digit multi-shot. And that is the end of the good news. The DPS on all options is okay to good, but never great. As with the primary, you'll want to focus on a range build for this secondary, for which I suggest the VERMISPLICER Ramble Splat. You may go to Gibber Splat for longer range, but that comes with a more notable DPS drop for precious little range compared to the other steps, so really I wouldn't go that far. The real letdown for this weapon though is that in practice, it liked to argue with me on what we're actually attacking. It would seemingly latch onto just the wrong target, ruining the overall effectiveness of the gun. It has okay enough status procs, but being distributed to semi-random enemies ruins that as well. So if there's a kit gun to skip, this is the one. And so, finally, the Sporelacer Secondary. I'm happy to announce that this one is something else. I acquired it first on stream at twitch.tv/theengineer, and naturally I'd recommend you check that out. Warframe every Wednesday and Sunday. And both chat and I were shocked at the results for this gun. For this one, you want to get full damage, which is the Haymaker Splat Sporelacer. This put out a lot of hurt very easily. It's got a solid AoE, but with a stagger, so use a stagger friendly frame like Rhino or Nezha, and the damage is actually pretty good. The fire rate is low, but manageable, and with the innate toxin, it's easy to get viral to really enhance the damage output. Now in meta terms, I don't feel this can usurp the Kuva Nukor, but it comes astoundingly close. I said the VERMISPLICER Secondary is one to skip, well, this weapon is one you should absolutely make. It packs a punch without having to kill a whole lich. Do beware that the Sporelacer is a very visually noisy weapon, so maybe don't use it with Mirage, you know? But the Sporelacer does have an incredible yeet potential with ragdolls, and that is just amazing. And there we have it, 4 kit guns, 4 infested oddities. There's the VERMISPLICER Primary, which you should build Brash Splat and get yourself a slightly disappointing infested Amprex. For the VERMISPLICER Secondary, build Ramble Splat, but actually don't. For MR you only needed the Primary. For the Sporelacer Primary, build Tremor Splat, unlocking an automatic explosion cannon that's outclassed on arrival. And for the Sporelacer Secondary, build Haymaker Splat and prepare to get some well-deserved ragdolls even into higher levels. And that's that, so thank you very much for watching. If you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a like. And if you're new, subscribing too will notify you of yet more guides as I bring them. If you missed the first part of kit guns on the primary ones, go check that out now. It's got cool graphs with the math all taken out, so you can just get the best builds you need. And as always, lay spores, bust banes, and fight well, Tenno.